Hey there, guys. Larissa and Elgin, thank you for being, a guest on my podcast channel.
Thank you for having us.
And
Thank you.
I would like to tell my viewers that they are also YouTubers and they run a channel called Into the Desert where they talk about multiple things. And I would like to ask you questions out of some of the videos that I watched of yours. And
Okay.
in one of the videos, I guess you guys talked about anxious generation. So can you enlighten my viewers about that?
About what?
I'll,
Anxious
I'll
generation.
start. Yeah, so The Anxious Generation is a book by Jonathan Haidt, and it basically talks through how our gentle parenting styles and how we are coddling our children. We're not letting them go out. We're not letting them be independent. We're giving them technology instead of playtime, and it creating a generation that doesn't know how to deal with this world. They don't have the skills to stand on their own 2 feet, and they're very afraid of this world. They're very scared and they're very anxious. And in that book, he challenges parents to start children very young and get them to go out into the world and to go out and do things alone. And so you see parents who go out, and we show a couple of clips at the beginning of our video, um, where these parents are basically sending their children, these 6 7 year old children, into stores to order and buy food and then bring it out, and the parents aren't allowed to go in there. They're not allowed to help them out. They need to let their child do it alone. And you see these videos and the kids go out and they're kind of a little nervous, but then they come out and they've got these huge smiles like, Mom, I did this. This was wonderful. And it's that empowerment that you're teaching these children, and it makes it so wonderful, and something that for a long time has been lost in our society, and to the point where we've been told that if you do that with your children, they're going to you're going to get in trouble. It's bad parenting. You have to protect your children and you can't let them do things on their own. And now we're pushing back and saying, no, our children need these skills.
Makes sense. Larissa and Elgin, what drives the parents to be helicopter parents? Like, why such need of protection all the time? Why mollycoddle their children all the time?
It's something that was emerging as I was a parent. When I was a kid, that it was completely foreign to me. I mean, my mother, we'd have breakfast, she'd kick us out of the house and told us not to come back until lunchtime. And you know, I'm I was I was in pre-kindergarten at that age.
Hmm.
And I spent most of the time in the yard, but I could wander pretty much anywhere I wanted to go as long as I was back by noon. So somewhere in the 70s and 80s, we got this whole concept of stranger danger, where you teach your kids to be afraid of strangers, and I never liked that. One, I'm an engineer and I like to look at data, and if you actually look at the data, at least in the United States, most kids are harmed by parents and relatives. And so if you really want to just go by the data, so you tell your kids to avoid all your relatives and go with strangers. And we also had some really tragic cases of kids who got lost. And of course,
Hmm.
the community would go out and there'd be people searching all over the place. And they would later find out the kid heard the people, calling for them, but they had so much stranger danger built into them that they hid from the people who were trying to rescue them. And that just grew and grew, and to the point that, as a teacher at a university, we had a teacher sessions, and we had one of the office staff, the people who do admissions, come up and was giving an amusing little anecdote of this mother who had called into the university to explain that her daughter is really independent and her daughter can actually do all this stuff on her own, and we could trust that her daughter will be able to be a self-supporting person within the university. And it's like, well, if she's so good, why isn't she talking to me instead of you? So we just built us up around, and then we've even had cases in the United States where one a year or two ago, where I think it was 8 and 10-year-old were walking to a park, which was about a mile from their house. So they go into the park, okay, and off they go. Well, they got picked up by the police, and the parents were arrested for letting them do that.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's sort of what Jonathan Haidt is sort of rebelling against. Is this idea that, as a kid, I had to go out and figure things out on my own, and go find kids, and we had to organize things, and you don't realize you're doing that, but you learn life skills doing that. And we're having a lot of kids. I mean, as a manager, one of the big issues with new hires right out of college, and they come in, they've never actually worked before, and they have no concept of how do you actually function in a work environment. So you have to sort of teach them those skills that nobody a generation ago or two would have had to. They'd already have known. They would have known what was expected of them.
And me, I have my kids are now in middle school, but I've kind of had to grow up in this gentle parenting society culture. And my kids are adopted, so there's that added fear of I have a lens on me on how I'm raising my kids. The government is actually watching me. I've actually had CPS called on me because I let my kids play. We were camping at a campground, and I had to do a meeting. And so I was in my RV working, and the kids were running around with their friends playing, and I had CPS called on me because I wasn't watching my kids. Now, my kids are 9 and 10 at the time. They are very capable of handling themselves. Plus, they had walkie-talkies, and they were in an enclosed area that was safe with lots of playgrounds and lots of other kids. So why CPS came, and then of course, then they came and they're like, yeah, you have nothing to worry about. You're fine. But the fact that this is something I have to deal with, this is always in the back of my head is, am I doing something that the police are going to come and arrest me for? And so I've always had to do this balancing act of how do I let my kids be kids and do things that I enjoy doing as a child that I know they're fully capable of doing without having the police call me by some parent who thinks I'm irresponsible. And it's a very, very, very difficult thing. And I live in a neighborhood where there are a number of children that are my kids' age. And when it comes to summertime, I say, well, why don't you go out and play with the other kids? And they're like, well, they can't. They're at their grandparents, or they're at daycare, or they're whatever. You're talking about middle school children. Why are middle school children's days so scheduled? Why don't they have the freedom to be able to go play at a park? I have a park literally a block away from my house, and the kids aren't allowed to go without parental supervision. And it makes parenting very difficult. And so I really appreciate this pushback that parents are doing, saying, no, it's okay for us to let our children do this. It's okay for them to do this. They'll be fine. And Jonathan Haidt even talks about the statistics of, in the 80s and 90s, there was a crime rate. And so there was a little extra fear in those decades that started this trend. But that went away. By the 90s, it was gone, and it's even lower now than it ever was. But the fear is so much higher than it ever was.
Got it. And Elgin, like in your statement, you said about life skills. So when it comes to that, I guess books are, really significant. Now, like nowadays in my country, I'm not sure, but a lot of people, they don't want to read books, actual books. I can see a lot of books behind you, and I'm also a voracious reader. But what sort of, Larissa and Elgin, your take on it? Like, why do people get rid of the books, or they don't want to read books?
Well, it's kind of a shame because I think technology is a big part of that. It, reading is work. It's you have to sit down and do it. If you do it for a while and you're not especially if you haven't practiced at it, you're going to get tired, right? It's mental exercise. It's so much easier just to sit on your phone and scroll and scroll and watch this video and then scroll and watch that video. And we had this thing for a while. Again, as a teacher, I would have my students come up to me and say, well, I'm a visual learner. It's I need to have things visually presented to me. And that was a very popular theory for a while. It's been pretty much debunked, although students still think that, no, it's not that you're a visual learner. It's just that you can pick up. So it's easier to watch a video than it is to read a book. When I grew up, it was very, very common. I'd go see a movie as a kid, and I go, "Wow, that was a great, great movie." And inevitably, there would be some adult who had read the book and go, "Yeah, but the book is so much better."
Yeah.
And eventually, that instilled in me, and I began to actually be not a student reader, but a casual reader. I began to read books on my own, and initially those were novels and whatever. But over time, it got to where I basically read 30 to 40 books a year. Now I'm down about 20 to 30, but those are about half nonfiction, half fiction. And the nonfiction tends to be in science, philosophy, history, things where I learn something, current events. And I find it engaging intellectually to do that. But there's a hurdle you have to get over in our technology driven world today. I talked to a lot of people that the last time they actually ever even picked up a book was in school, and they haven't picked up a book since school. And that's such a shame. It's, to sit there on your phone and just scroll when you could be reading a book, because the book's going to engage you more. There's a difference between being engaged for 30 seconds and being engaged for several hours. There's a difference between seeing an idea and thinking about an idea and thinking through the ramifications of an idea. And those are skills that a lot of people have lost because they're just reacting to whatever's the last video they scrolled through on their phone. And however outraged they were about it, that will go away and be meaningless 15 minutes later as they scroll through some other thing. So people don't know history. Some of my books I've written because when I taught, I realized how little. I wrote Preserving Democracy, which is a kind of a deep dive into political science and why the American government and the American Constitution and everything are set up the way they are. And students just didn't have any concept. And you see that, I see it at least in the reaction to the news, when people are making claims one way or the other, and they really don't have any concept of what the actual issues are. So I think reading is extremely important. I think it's tragic that we're losing it. And, the best thing a parent can do for their child, and I'm so glad that Larissa has done this, but the best thing that a parent can do for their child is to get them into the habit of reading.
Yeah, my favorite quote is from Ratatouille, where Remy's talking to his brother, and his brother's all upset, and he says, "But Dad says blah, blah, blah." And Remy says, "There's a lot of things Dad doesn't know. They can fill a book of it. They actually fill hundreds of books about it, which is why I read." Right? And I love that because, yeah, that is why we read. We learn from books. And I think attention span is a huge issue of why children don't read today. I think it's so much easier to zone out in a movie than it is to read a book. And I hated reading in school. The way they teach reading and literature in school is dry and boring and uninteresting. And they choose things that because they have some sort of social impact or some sort of meaningful analysis of some abstract concept that they want to teach. And it's like, I'm bored just even thinking about it. And books are so much more than that. And what I've done with my children is we read a lot of audiobooks. And so when we're in the car, we put on an audiobook. And it took them a while. But I started very, very young. But it took them a while before they realized that reading these stories is opening up an entire world. And even though a lot of what we read is fantasy and fiction and fun, we've done a lot of the Percy Jackson series, we've done all of the Harry Potter series, we're currently in DJ Mihail's Pendragon series, and they are just absolutely loving it. My son and I are reading Aragon, my daughter and I have read Twilight together. So I mean, we have books that we read, you know, with me and my daughter and me and my son, and then we have books that we read as a family, and then I read on my own. So I'm very much into the 40, 50 books a year kind of thing. And it really makes a difference because they're reading these books and they're seeing the story. And then we talk about how what's happening in the story relates to real life. So even in a story like Twilight, which is a guilty pleasure because it is very much a what not to do in life kind of story, but it's done in a fun way. So it's fun as long as you understand that this is not what relationships are. These are why what they're doing is really, really bad. And what's really fun is there's another series called Fourth Wing. It's the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros, which is a romantasy book that I bought the book so that I could edit it out so that it was appropriate for my children because the story is amazing. And it's kind of like the opposite of Twilight. It's like the what to do, and to be able to draw those comparisons to say, yeah, so this is how they did this relationship here, and this is how he was worried about her and protective, but he controlled her. And here he's worried about her and he's protective, but he's helping her to do it safely, right? And there's a huge difference in being able to draw those correlations and teach that to my children allows them not only to get this wonderful story, but to be able to take this story and understand it in a way that can apply to their lives. And that is something you cannot get on a TikTok video. It doesn't exist. There's not enough time for that kind of analysis. I mean, we can listen to 5 minutes a book and then have a 30-minute conversation about that 5 minutes. You watch a 30-second TikTok video and, you know, if you can talk a minute or two, it's not the same conversation.
And in the light of what you are saying, Larissa, like a few months ago, like I watched a video on YouTube and it was about the significance of book. Like when we read books, there are some sort of chemicals in our brain that only gets activated when you do the reading. It doesn't get activated when you watch a movie or when you do anything else that releases dopamine. So the significance of books I came to realize by after watching that short video. So what's your take on it? How do you feel like when you read a lot of books mentally?
Who's that to?
For both of you, like.
Well, I learned that I'm very intellectual. I'm an engineer. I tend to like to take things apart and put them, see how they work and put them back together. So I tend to approach a lot of subjects that same way. My thought, commenting on something that Larissa said, the books in school are dry. I think there's a lot of books that are for children, supposedly, that are really not. They're for adults. There are a number of books that I read because I was supposed to when I was much younger. But now that I'm not quite so young, I've come back to them and read them again. And it's like, they are so much better. I think a lot of what we call children's books, the sort of the classic children's books, are actually written about children for adults to look back and see how they really were. And so when you have a child read them, they don't quite get it yet. But it's important for children to read, and it's not quite as important what they read. If you pick up the habit of reading and you've constantly got a book that you're reading, my experience was I eventually got tired of stories and I looked for something a little bit more meaty, and I started moving into the nonfiction. And as I did that, I began to read more. And like I said, about half of what I read is nonfiction. And like I'm reading the book Fight right now. Well, I just went through the last election. I think what happened during the last election. But when I deliberately read books like this because they always give me a lot more detail as to because there's what you see in the news and then there's what's actually going on. And so you can say, okay, how well did I see what was going on? what were they really doing? You know, how do things lack up? I always walk away. I don't always agree with the perspective because I read books from the left and from the right. I don't always agree with the perspective, but I always come away with a little bit better understanding of what actually happened, because most people will report accurate details. I mean, there's some people who make things up, and I tend to avoid those authors when I find out about them. But most people will write what they think is true, but by definition, they're only giving you part of the story, or they're slanting it one way or the other. And so, but when you read a lot of these books, you begin to get a better understanding of what's really going on. And so it helps me, for example, from getting caught up in the hype of the moment, because like, oh, we're hair's on fire, something's happening right now. And it's like, well, actually, no, there's a lot more nuances, and this is what's really going on, and I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I have a better perspective on it. So that's the sort of thing you can only get by reading and by spending the time thinking through things, because you can't read. You can react to a picture without any thought. And in fact, one of the big trends in movies from, say, the 30s and 40s to now is, if you go watch a movie, and we have this at least in one of my books. I don't know if we did a video on it, where they took what was the name of the movie?
Shop Around the Corner and You've Got Mail.
You've Got Mail. Yeah, Shop Around the Corner and You've Got Mail. Literally the same story. It is the same story, one done back in the 40s and the one done in the 90s. And there's one scene called the cafe scene, which is virtually identical in both movies, except that in the original one by I think it was Frank Capra, it's the same length, like 10 minutes, but there's only a small number of cuts, and the average length of a scene is like 20 or 30 seconds. In the You've Got Mail, the same scene is shot, but the average length of each scene, where they switch camera angles or something, is only 2 or 3 seconds. You can sit and think about what the characters are doing in the original. You can only react to what the characters are doing, and you're basically putting yourself in the control of the director. These guys are really good at what they do. They don't want you thinking, they want you reacting. And so, in a book, I can read something in a book, and guess what? I can stop. I can think about it. I can go back and read it again. I can think about it. I can page back a little bit. And, yeah, look what he said here. Look what he said here. I can do all that in a book, and I do. In reading, and watching a movie, you can't really do that. You get a little of that if you watch the movie a second time. You see things you didn't see the first time, but it's not quite the same thing.
I watch a lot of
one of the I was going to say, one of the things that I teach my children too, because we watch a lot of movies as well, and we watch read a lot of books, but when we're comparing the differences between them, it's kind of like when you're watching a movie, you have two senses. All you have is what you hear and what you see. There is nothing more that they can give you in the movie. And thank goodness they don't give you a sense of smell. And if they do, I probably won't go to movies anymore.
They tried that once. It didn't work.
It wouldn't work. Like, nobody wants to smell a movie, right? But when you're in a book, you have the ability to read all five senses and then some. You get this background layer, like Elgin was talking about. You get to understand what this character is thinking and what that character is thinking and what's going on behind the scenes, and you get a better picture. And for me, when I read a book, it's like watching a movie. I can picture everything, and it's like in Neverending Story, where you get to be the character, because that's what books do. They allow you to be in the story. And sometimes you're very grateful because you can close the book and you can say, okay, I'm okay right now. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. I need time to process. And then there's times where it's like, okay, no, I can't do anything. I got to figure out what happens here, right? And it just engages you in a way that nothing else does. Because even when you're on the edge of your seat in a movie, all you have to do is kind of look through the side of your eye and suddenly you're out of the movie. And, I think one of the worst experiences I had at a movie is we were at a premiere and the guy next to me fell asleep and started snoring. It wasn't the end of the world. I mean, for bad experiences in a movie, it's not so bad, but it took me out of the movie and I didn't enjoy the movie because I had a guy snoring next to me. And so,
What was the
but when
name
you're
of
in a
the movie?
book, that's not a factor.
Larissa, what was that movie again? The one where the
I
guys.
don't remember the name of the movie where the guy was snoring. It was, one of those big premiere. It could have been a Marvel movie for all I know, but it was that time frame. But it was one of those, you get up and you're there at midnight when it releases.
Makes sense.
This is probably why he was snoring.
I'm sure that's exactly why he was snoring, but.
And I'm a big fan of Agatha Christie. I'm not sure whether you guys like read her books or not, but I'm a big fan of her, and like I have like read all her books, and I've even
Which
watched
books are these?
Agatha Christie.
Oh, Agatha Christie.
The
Yes.
Nile and Murder
I
on the
grew up with her. Yes.
Nice. So, the point I'm trying to make is books are always better than the movies. You get the feeling, the intrinsic things that you can also visualize characters. You don't need a movie for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a learned skill.
Mm.
If someone's not read for a long time and they listen to this video and they go, oh, I think I'm going to try a book. They will find it's more difficult than they thought because it's like someone who used to be a runner, but they haven't run for 30 years and they suddenly decide they're going to get off their couch and they're going to go do that marathon. No, it's not going to go well the first time out.
No, you got to
Well, it's the
train.
same thing with books. It's something you have to learn. If you do it right and you do it frequently, you actually have learned how to read a book, how to get into the story, how to visualize what's going on. But it's definitely worth the effort. It really is.
True. And if I ask you a hypothetical question for both of you, Elgin and Larissa, that if you were a character of a fictional book, which character would you like to be, and which book will it be?
Well, I like mysteries, so I would probably be the detective. I don't know if I have a particular detective I'd like to be, but I like figuring things out. Early on, we played some. If you've noticed behind me, I'm somewhat of a gamer, and so I've been playing games, computer games since literally since the '70s when they were all text based. And early on there were some text based mysteries where you had to solve it. We tried those. Some were better than others, but I like those types of stories where you have to try and figure something out. So I'd be a detective of some sort.
Okay, makes sense. I guess you can be Hercule Poirot from Agatha Christie.
He came to mind. I don't know if he's definitely a potential.
I think I'm oscillating between I would love to live in the world of Ready Player One, but I'm not sure I would identify with those characters so much as just want to be in that world that he built. But on the other hand, I really like Stephanie Plum and Janet Ivanovich's books, and I think it would be fun to be her as a bounty hunter stumbling my way along. I love the comedy and adventure of those books. They're just really fun.
Okay. And which is the movie that you can watch gazillion of times and never get tired of it?
Well, I haven't seen it in a while, but for me that's easy. 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, okay, the classic one.
Yeah. Well, I was a kid when it came out. And in those days, they would release movies to the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood, and then it would just play there until it ran out and when people stopped coming. And so nowadays they talk about how much box office you get. In those days, they talked about how long it ran before it went out to general distribution. And if I remember correctly, 2001: A Space Odyssey ran for over 2 years before it came out to general distribution. And when it did, I remember going and seeing it and being completely enthralled. I saw it many times since then. In 1976 when Star Wars came out. Yeah, I remember my wife and I was on leave for the military back in Southern California, and let's go to the movie. We'd never been to Grauman's Chinese Theater. Let's go to Grauman's Chinese Theater and see whatever's playing there. So we drive down to Hollywood and Grauman's Chinese Theater, and the place was absolutely, totally, completely packed. Lines going all the way around the theater for this new movie called Star Wars. And so he said, well, let's not do that. Let's go see what's playing at the Cinerama Dome. So we went over to the Cinerama Dome, and they were doing a showing of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I got to see it there, and that was incredible. On the 70 millimeter curved screen, it's unlike any other theater I've been in. The closest I've come to the closest I've come to is we recently got the 4K version, and we have in our house, we have a theater with a 10-foot screen on it. Nothing comparable to the Cinerama Dome, but that was probably the closest that I've come to seeing it since then. But wow. That's just a movie I can watch over and over because it's an intellectual movie. You can't, if you're not going to think about what they're doing and what's going on, it's probably the most boring movie in the world. But if you think about the implications and the interactions and what's actually happening, to me, it's a fascinating movie.
True. And on that note, I guess, guys, we have to call it a day for today because we only have 2 minutes left. We will do the part 2 of it because Larissa's answer is still pending. But we can do the part 2 of it.
Okay.
All right. Sounds on good. That note, I guess I had a whale of a time having this podcast with you, and I'm sure that we'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being my guest. And I would like to tell my viewers that subscribe to the YouTube channel.
IntoTheDesert.info.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bye, guys, and we'll catch up soon. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Bye.